We're seeing the same kind of price drops in energy storage that we saw in solar panels, which are now 80% less than they were 7 years ago. So it's affordable, it's available, and the only thing that's stopping us is the most rogue, evil industry in the history of the world, the fossil fuel industry, because they know exactly what they're doing by selling their product and having us continue to burn it, and they don't care. They have sold out their own children for the profits that they think they're going to continue to get through 2050.
Busy days, always now, the news crowded constantly. A reminder that though every day probably the most important thing that's happening on Earth is the fact that the climate is now changing and changing fast, on no particular day is it the single most dramatic and emergent thing. It's always other things going on.
Natural Resources Committee is a very tough committee to be on in this Congress. And the reason why it's so tough is that when you're starting from a perspective that climate change does not exist, it's a very difficult position to start from, because how do you work with someone that is stuck in that mindset when we know that every single year we have storms, the types of storms, and just the weather conditions that are happening, and all of the things that are happening, not just in our state of California or in the country, but in the world.
The oceans are rising and so must we. Drive them out. The oceans are rising and so must we. Drive them out. The oceans are rising and so must we. Drive them out. The oceans are rising and so must we. Drive them out. The oceans are rising and so must we. Drive them out.
The environment is something that's been very near and dear to me for a long time. I don't take oil money. I don't take a dime of oil money. That makes it that much easier for me to stand up to the polluters and say, you're not going to do that here.
There is, in fact, a huge gap between the rhetoric and the reality. The political leaders say that we have a planet in peril and we need to take actions to deal with that, but in fact the actions don't correspond to that at all.
We who are a coastal community who understand the ravages of climate change here really must have a Congress and a president that acknowledges that we have a responsibility to our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren, that they have the same earth as we have.
It's more a case of greenwash, where they say the right words, but nobody will stand up and say exactly what is really needed in order to solve the problem.
One of the reasons I ran for Congress is because I believe that climate change is the single biggest long-term threat facing us.
I have Republican friends who represent the areas of Miami. They know they're going to be underwater. There will not be parts of Louisiana. We will lose islands.
COP21, formerly called the Conference of the Parties, that is, the parties of the UNFCCC, they come together every single year in a different city around the world to try to negotiate a treaty to address climate change. But in fact, a lot of people are calling it the Conference of the Polluters.
I've been attending the COPs since 1999, so a long time. It's been a real slog.
Conference of Parties, the COPs. The COPs have been meeting for 24 years, since 1994. When they first started to meet, the parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere was 358.61 parts per million. And so here we have 24 years of the United Nations not doing its job, because if they had, we wouldn't be looking at over 410 parts per million.
The carbon dioxide register on the site of Mauna Loa in Hawaii, perhaps the most important scientific instrument in the history of the planet, went to 412 parts per million for the first time last week. It hasn't been that high in about 17 million years on this planet.
The governmental representatives who are negotiating or attempting to negotiate these treaties aren't there on behalf of their own citizens. They're there on behalf of the companies and corporations that have been lobbying them. And in fact, the polluting corporations are often inside the very meetings where these decisions are being made. Our governments have been negotiating for 21 years to reduce greenhouse gases, to come up with some plan. And in all those 20 years, greenhouse gases have increased 60%. It's an utter disaster.
It's the same thing. Like, what are you guys doing at these international meetings? You haven't gotten anything done. You know, we're putting rules and procedures and processes in place so that if the society hits a tipping point, the international regime is there. So maybe the international regime can serve a catalytic function.
You see, the main problem today isn't that people don't think climate change is real, because they do. 63% of the people think it's real, only 18% say no. 52% say it's human caused, 52% say it's worried, but 44%, half and half, say it's nothing much to worry about. But what about solvable? If you ask people, will humanity solve the climate problem in this century, more or less? And people say, we're fucked. And this is because we don't have any credible story of how we turn society around. And that's the story we need to create. A narrative that people find plausible, credible, and we want to be part of it.
The first thing we need to do is switch to 100% renewable energy, clean renewable energy. And by that is mostly wind, solar, and some geothermal with battery storage.
We came out of the Stone Age not because we ran out of stone. But if you look at the history of human civilization, we may be witnessing the end of the industrial era of coal or fossil energy, and it is time for us to be thinking forward into a new era. And new energies and everything else is the way of the future, and we're not going to sit back and let that pass us.
If we get to 100% renewable in California, that's only about 12% of our greenhouse gas emissions. It's important, but it's a small slice in the big picture. Another 11% is the carbon that we use in buildings, both residences and commercial buildings. But then the big dog is transportation, because that's 37% of our emissions.
We must make our cars and trucks much more fuel efficient.
1 gallon of gasoline that you put in your car, a gallon, think of a gallon jug, will produce 19 pounds of carbon dioxide.
When the Ford Model T first came onto the market in 1908, it got 13 to 21 miles per gallon. But in 2015, there are still cars on the road that get the same gas mileage as one of the very first mass-produced cars. That's pretty crazy.
I place myself as somebody who's willing to dig into what is causing the problem in the first place. Not the only cause, but what's a big cause. And our current consumer-driven capitalist model is a big cause of human-caused climate change. Our overconsumption cannot be turned into better consumption to solve climate change. And I'm only more recently reminding people that our American way of life is AWOL on the planet. I'm not the first person to say that. But that doesn't mean that we have to crawl back into a cave. We first have to contend with how the current capitalistic economic system, i.e., private enterprise and stockholder return on investments that drive a corporate capitalist view, has created this problem. Mass production, mass advertisement meant mass consumerism. Mass consumerism meant using a lot of fossil fuels and a lot of materials that are neither biodegradable nor maintain a balance where a natural carbon cycle or other greenhouse gases could be absorbed in the typical pools of the atmosphere of the ocean, the forests, and the soil.
If you change your diet to more of a vegetable-based diet, you will be assisting not only animals that their homes are being threatened, for instance in the Amazon, to grow crops for cattle, but you'll also be helping the climate crisis as well, because not as many forest fires will be set deliberately to slash and burn to grow crops for cattle.
The scientific evidence has already conclusively proven that your reduction of red meat will go far and away, a lot farther in reducing greenhouse gas emissions than purchasing your food locally.
My name is David Schmidt, and I'm an agricultural engineer at the University of Minnesota and regional coordinator for the national project Animal Agriculture in a Changing Climate. There's a significant amount of miscommunication about the role of agriculture in climate change. Some say that animal agriculture is the largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, while others deny any contribution from animals. The answer lies somewhere in between.
Taking a closer look at the sources of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States alone by economic sector, we see that agriculture contributes 9% of total emissions in the U.S. This graph compares the greenhouse gas emissions of several products on a per kilogram basis. Of all the products, lamb is the highest emitter per kilogram of product consumed, and beef is the second highest emitter at 27 kilograms of CO2 equivalents per kilogram of beef consumed. Dairy is much lower in emissions, with 1.9 kilograms of CO2 equivalents per kilogram of milk consumed.
With the world population growing and over 1 billion people living without electricity, the unmet demand for energy overwhelms the positive effect of a few thousand people driving Teslas, particularly if the electricity generated to power these vehicles does not come from clean sources, such as wind and solar. With areas such as Yukon and Canada perhaps becoming more desirable to live, human beings can survive by migrating, but the fate of animals such as this one is far less certain.
We are in the middle of a mass extinction. Climate change is helping drive that, for sure. And so bringing it back to the people part of it is that the scary thing about climate change isn't just that we're wiping out these species, but it's the role of all of these species, all of the little bits and pieces and parts that work together, the microbes in the soils, the pollinators, the birds, they all fit into a system, and there's a purpose for that system, and it's like a beautifully engineered clock, and you take off the back of the clock and you see all the little things moving, right, for a purpose. We're pulling those pieces out with climate change.
It's an honor here to stand with all of you, to stand with all my brothers and sisters, to fight for our earth, to fight for our water. When we were created in our creation story, in our tongue book creation story, the human beings were created last. And it wasn't because we were the last, because we were greater than all those created before us. And it wasn't because we were inferior to all those created before us, to all the animals, to all the plants, to all the nature. But it was because we were given the duty to protect what sometimes cannot protect itself. But today I march here not only for myself, not only for this earth, but for my nieces and my nephews that follow behind me, for my little cousins that I see watching me, for those little ones who aren't even born yet, who aren't even stars in our sky yet. I march for them. Because in the end, it's not up to me. In the end, I will not inherit this earth. In the end, they will. In the end, they will be the next caretakers. And if we can't show them that we care about our earth, how can we tell them that we care about them?
Since 2009, the oil companies, the coal companies, the electric utilities have spent a staggering $2.2 billion in federal lobbying and another $330 million in federal campaign contributions. In other words, as a result of ineffective lobbying legislation and the disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decision, large corporations can now spend as much as they want on campaigns and elections. And that is exactly what the fossil fuel industry is doing. Here is the simple truth. Any Republican candidate for president, for the US Senate or for the US House, who has the courage to acknowledge the reality of climate change and who wants to do something about it, that candidate will lose the financial support, the campaign contributions coming from the Koch brothers and other powerful special interests in the fossil fuel industry. Further, there is a strong likelihood that that candidate would be challenged by a primary opponent when he or she came up for election, a candidate supported by the industry. In other words, when we talk about a corrupt campaign finance system, there is no clearer example of that corruption than how the Republican Party is more interested in representing the interests and profits of the fossil fuel industry than the well-being of the entire planet.
It's very difficult because the leadership of their party and the funding behind their party primarily benefits greatly by continuing in a carbon-based economy.
When I talk to Republican policymakers, I've talked to over 70 in the last year, I've had one deny climate change. The rest of them have accepted it and been afraid of the politics. We have to make the politics right for them, and they are scared.
This situation is extremely bad. And we've been stalled by the fossil fuel cartel for decades now. You know, unconscionably, almost to the point of evilly.
We're still fighting against those politicians and both sides of the aisle. I mean, in California, we're talking about all these, they call it corporate Democrats, and I call them oily Democrats, who are getting all this money from the fossil fuel industry and are voting against their own constituents. And they're making their own constituents sick by opposing legislation to curb emissions.
Oil and gas companies can deduct nearly all of the expenditures a company makes to prepare a well for production. Oil and gas producers can deduct 6% of taxable income derived from qualified domestic production activities. The depletion allowance permits large oil and gas companies to deduct 15% of the gross income from oil and gas produced from a well each year, and low-producing marginal wells to deduct more than the net income from the property. Companies engaged in oil shale exploration and development can claim a 15% depletion allowance on income generated from these activities. Oil and tax companies can deduct the costs of exploring and developing new domestic oil shale fields in the same tax year that the costs were incurred, whether or not income is ever generated on the property. Oil and gas producers are able to reduce taxable income by the way they compute expenses of geological and geophysical surveys. Companies can deduct the cost of injecting fluids and gases into older wells in order to recover additional oil. Certain oil and gas interests are exempt from limitations on amount of losses that can be used for deductions.
How can we possibly justify continuing to burn poison and ruining the future of our kids? How can we possibly justify being the first generation to turn things over to the next in far worse shape than we got it? In fact, in a condition that, we'll just call it unlivable. I'm a white American male baby boomer. I'm a member of the Lucky Sperm Club. No generation in the history of the planet has ever had a bigger advantage or lift up than me. I owe so much to the next generation. That's the way it's supposed to work. When you're given great benefits, you're supposed to pay that forward. You're supposed to give that back so somebody else can enjoy the same benefits that you did. I cannot stop doing this work until I have a sense that that's possible for our kids and our grandkids.
We can make Louisiana and all of the Gulf of Mexico 100% renewable if we invest in that.
The science and technology path to get to that 2 degree or 1.5 degree, the limit emissions to that levels, is really technically quite possible. What we're lacking, though, is figuring out the interface between the science, the engineering, and the policy on this.
We don't need energy that makes residents sick. We need energy that it's clean, that is renewable, and that is affordable. And today, even without subsidies, renewable energy is cheaper than natural gas, than oil, and than coal.
Solar, wind, geothermal, wave energy, storage, demand response, energy efficiency, the ability now with electric cars to shape and move electricity and store it. We don't need anything other than the political balls for people and the smarts for any of our electeds to grasp this and say, I don't care if people don't understand it. I don't care if this is psychologically really difficult. I'm going to do it.
We can do this now. We can do it with a mix of engineering and also with changes in the ways that we run our societies. I mean, electric cars will be nice, but bikes and buses and subways are really nice too, and communities that are built to take advantage of those things and all that. The problem is not that we don't know what to do, or that somehow we lack the sun and the wind. California, you may have noticed, has plenty. What we lack at the moment is the kind of combination of vision and political will to make it happen. What activism, in the end, is mostly about is changing the zeitgeist, changing the notion of what's normal and obvious.
You have to do 3 basic things. One is you have to produce electricity in a low carbon way. Second, we're going to have to shift from the internal combustion engine to electric or equivalent vehicles, because the transport sector accounts for a huge proportion of emissions. So we have to get out of internal combustion engines. You can't capture carbon at the tailpipe of an internal combustion vehicle. You have to have a different kind of vehicle. And third, we need huge energy efficiency.
By 2030, we need to have, Southern California has some beliefs that we need to have 7 million electric vehicles on the road. Currently, the state of California has around 300,000. For us in transportation electrification, like the time is now, right? We need more EVs on the road yesterday.
The thing that people will argue about against wind and solar is they're what's called intermittent resource. The wind does not always blow, the sun does not always shine. However, it turns out that wind and solar are very complementary in nature. When you have, like when the wind is not blowing, often the sun is shining during the day and vice versa. So if you combine the two and you use hydroelectric power to fill in the gaps, because you can turn in hydro on and off really rapidly, and you use geothermal power as what's called base load or constant power, you can match power demand with supply readily.
In June 2017, the National Academy of Sciences published an article challenging assumptions made by Stanford professor Mark Jacobson. purpose of going to 100% clean renewable energy is not just to get rid of emissions from electricity, but also to reduce emissions from transportation as electric vehicles become more common. That in turn reduce emissions from industry by decreasing the need for oil refineries. CO2 emissions from electricity vary regionally, with cleaner energy amounting to greater benefits from electric vehicles. In 2015, the Hawaii State Legislature passed legislation making Hawaii the first state in the nation to set a 100% renewable portfolio standard for the electricity sector.
Hawaii has a very ambitious 100% renewable energy by 2045 goal. It's exciting.
Senate Bill 100 by Senator De Leon, enacting energy.
Senator De Leon.
We have about close to 3 decades, 28 years, until we meet our mandated target of 100% clean energy. It is doable. It is within arm's length, especially when we have the Vice President of Sempra Energy saying very clearly that technological-wise, it is doable and it is quite possible.
What if we can't make that mandate that we're putting into law today? What it's going to do is it's going to drive up electricity bills.
Yesterday, we honored the memory, or the birth and the memory of John F. Kennedy, who was president during the 1960s and decided we were going to put a man on the moon within a decade. We had nothing other than a dream and an aspiration and great American ingenuity, and we did put a man on the moon within that 10-year period of time. This is eminently doable. All the claims that we're overburdening people and that the world and the sky is falling aren't true, never have been true, aren't going to be true. I'm kind of tired of hearing all the negative things. This is the spirit of California. This is a good bill. Let's attempt to achieve this. With that, I ask for an aye vote.
Let's further decarbonize our economy to deal straightforward with the issue of climate change. Madam President, as colleagues, I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Thank you, Senator De Leon. Mr. Secretary, please call the roll.
Aye. Wilk.
Senator moves a call.
100% renewables, the whole world's watching. And it's challenging. It's challenging because we have great sun and we have great wind, but later today we may not. And of course, the sun won't be out tonight. So how do you harness that energy? So you need storage, you need transmission. Those are challenges, but those are opportunities, and those opportunities are going to create jobs.
Battery storage is the technology that's really coming into play very quickly and on a very large scale that helps to balance out the intermittency of solar and wind. And what's so great about it, I mean, I don't understand exactly how it works, but those storage facilities are able to fill in the gaps when power becomes intermittent, so that you get that nice straight line that you need to assure that the power is always available for the people who are using it.
There was a particular assembly member in a district adjacent to where I live who held the bill up because he had reservations about aspects of it. So when we say that we have a bill stalled in Assemblymember Holden's committee because of some union reservations, I think that is just an invitation to us to talk with our brothers and friends at the unions who are normally in lockstep with the environmental movement. We're not usually in opposition in our political goals. So the labor interests in California who are opposing SB 100 will be brought along into the fold soon enough.
There is a motion to pass as amended to Assembly floor. Roll call on the motion. The bill is out. There are 8 votes in favor. Mr. Chairman, leave the roll open.
California has passed SB 100 after a long litany of other bills. I think that's positive change, right? It took us a long time to get to where we're at. And in a lot of ways, it's like trying to steer a cargo ship. And so it takes time to make the change. So I wouldn't say like nothing is happening and we've failed. I just don't think we're succeeding as fast as we need to succeed. And And that, I think, is complicated because it's complicated because of economics. You know, we've built an economy that was built on oil and coal and natural gas, and we're having to and cars that use that, you know, transportation system that uses that. So we have to completely rework those systems. And there's entrenched interests who make a lot of money off of the status quo. So we're having to shift that completely. We have to change how our entire economy works.
And the mighty multinationals have monopolized the oxygen, so it's as easy as breathing for us all to participate. Yes, they're buying and selling off shares of air, and you know it's all around you, but it's hard to point and say there. So you just sit on your hands and quietly contemplate your next bold move. The next thing you're gonna have to prove to yourself. And what a waste of thumbs that are opposable to make machines that are disposable and sell them to seagulls flying circles around one big right way. Yes, the left wing was broken long ago by the slingshot of COINTELPRO, and now it's so hard to have faith in anything, especially your next bold move. Well, the next thing you're gonna have to prove to yourself.
I'm wondering whether you would be in favor of a revenue-neutral carbon fee in order to mitigate climate change.
I am supportive of any number of those ideas. I'd want to see what it looks like, but generally speaking, I would be supportive.
Economists tell us that if we want less of something, we should make it more expensive. If we want less carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, we want to make it more expensive. We want to make the people who pollute with carbon accountable for the cost to our atmosphere and our lives.
There are all these examples where the private sector is internalizing profits and externalizing costs, which is normal in a capitalist society. This is what's going to happen. But in some cases, those costs that are being externalized to others who didn't ask to bear those costs, government could correct them by saying, we're going to levy an externality fee. And we're going to use that money to disincentivize people from doing that in the future, to fix the problem that was caused, and to do things in a more sustainable way.
If a company is not told that they need to stop polluting, they're going to just keep on polluting, not because they're evil, but because under capitalism, they're going to make the product for the less amount of cost and sell it for as much as they can. If they can pollute and make it cheaper, they will do that. That's why there's 50 state EPAs and a national EPA whose sole job is to intervene in the market and force companies to internalize the actual cost of their product. So what the carbon fee does, and it's also supported by conservative economists as well, is it says, look, all these companies that are making things and producing energy they're getting a free ride because they're not counting the enormous damage to the environment from the release of carbon and methane. I think this revenue neutral carbon fee, where you take the money from pricing carbon correctly and giving it back to people, I think that has a shot.
I think it's normal for a business to try to internalize profits and externalize costs, but I also think it's government's job to push back and be a steward of the public good to say, we understand why you did this, but it's causing these problems.
The big major oil companies all recognize the science of global warming. All of them believe that a market-based price is the most efficient way of doing it. So you don't really get pushback from the major oil companies.
So the keys to our proposal, there's three legs to the stool, if you will. The first is to place a fee on fossil fuels. Our proposal does so upstream, so it's at the well or at the mine or at the port. And it places a fee starting at $15 a ton, which is fairly low, keeps the shock to the economy low, and then increases every year by $10 a ton. Second leg to the stool is what do we do with the revenue? Well, our belief is that the best use of the revenue is to return all of it to American households. Thirdly, we have what we call a border carbon adjustment, and that keeps businesses whole, if you will, from competition from countries that don't have an equivalent carbon fee.
Our proposal has a fourth pillar, which is a regulatory simplification pillar. So for regulations that are essentially impacted by the carbon price, you would be able to pull those back. And of course, that's an interest to businesses who are regulated.
The carbon price is always way too low. The only ones who win with carbon tax are the polluters and the people making the trades. Market-based approaches to deal with climate change just don't work. I mean, we call it pay-to-pollute schemes, and it just enables polluters just to keep doing business as usual. Why would fossil fuel industries love cap and trade or carbon tax? Because they just can keep doing what they're doing.
What has motivated BP and these other large oil, energy companies in particular to endorse this idea of a carbon tax?
This is a position they've held for many years.
On the policy front, as you mentioned, we've articulated support for carbon tax as the best approach on this. Focusing on the importance of efficient policy is actually pretty critical. And so when we look at the suite of available policy approaches, that's why we have for a decade now supported a carbon tax as the most appropriate means of dealing with this.
What we need is command and control. We need regulations, straight up regulations. And the fossil fuel industry hates that. Again, if Exxon comes in favor of cap and trade and comes in favor of carbon tax, that should just tell you everything. Why would they want that?
Half the states in the United States have no extractive industries at all. We don't do coal, we have no oil, we have no natural gas. So for us, the idea of moving safely upstream, away from the attention span of the voter, in the hopes that she won't notice that we've raised the price of her fossil fuel, is less of a possibility. We've got to deal with people more or less directly and honestly. And I might say, as somebody who's interested in this issue precisely because I want the individual consumer to get, well, a market signal. I'm disquieted by the fact that the sales of SUVs and light trucks are way up, given the cheapness of gas, and the sales of fuel efficiency vehicles are way down. So it's not enough for me personally as a policymaker to see some middle person, some middleman absorb the price signal. I do want it to resonate with my voters. I want us to take those risks because that behavior, the consumer piece, has got to change if we're going to drive down emissions beyond electric power and actually be effective in the transportation sector. We've got to be willing to suppose that the individual behavior that changes is not, as I say, a corporate middle structure, but the consumer herself. I'm optimistic that we're going to get there because my constituents are increasingly terrified about the alternatives.
Capitalism's a big experiment. We're seeing ways that it works really well, and we're seeing ways that it fails. And I think we're just starting to be brave enough to take a look at the way it fails and figuring out who should be responsible for correcting and fixing it, especially now that the stakes are so high with the new IPCC report out saying, hey guys, wake up, pay attention, things could get really ugly really fast unless we fix this.
But if you had a government that was mobilizing, that had long-term plans, that were at the appropriate scale, prices would be one of the instruments that government would have to use, right? I mean, it's a capitalist world. Prices matter a lot. But we're also going to need regulations. We're going to need industrial policies. We're going to need international cooperation. And it's all going to have to be blanketed by a generalized sense that we're in it together. And when we're talking about something like decarbonizing the global economy in 40 to 50 years, we are not talking about business as usual.
As usual, and this is just the way it is, supply and demand. I'm so sick and tired of them telling me it's supply and demand. How did you get to that action? How did you get to the Dakota Access Pipeline? I drove my hybrid vehicle, which took me like 12 years to pay off. Do I want to drive a Tesla? Sure, I can't afford it. Why are you allowed to build gas-guzzling vehicles that we know are killing the planet? Why are you allowed to make styrofoam that you know doesn't break down? Don't put that crap on the shelves. You are the ones that know it's bad. If I see one more commercial that tells me to turn off the water when I'm brushing my teeth while industry's wasting and poisoning billions of gallons of water every minute as we speak, I'm gonna scream. They need to take responsibility.
Hopefully we can continue to push the economies of scale so that it's not just environmental noblesse oblige, where the wealthiest people can afford to buy Teslas and help bring the price down as the volume of Teslas that roll off the assembly line every week increases. Hopefully we're moving from environmental noblesse oblige to practical affordability for more people. We just have to keep getting those costs down.
We're not going to be saved by Teslas. Teslas are nice, but we also need free public transportation. Really good free public transportation, along with the Teslas.
My child's a teenager and he understands climate change very well, and he's pretty pessimistic about it. And so I find myself trying to bolster his optimism about it. Honey, we have the solutions. We just need to implement them. We're kind of half-heartedly implementing them, but we can turn this around if we wanted to. We just need the political will to do it and to send the market signal to people to do the right thing. And whatever adjustments we need to make to the market price, we should do it.
The beautiful thing is that no matter where you are in America, people want solar energy. It's just what people want. When you read about it in the paper, a lot of times solar gets kind of subjugated to climate policy, right? You say the climate's the headline, solar's like down here somewhere. Or our solar jobs are being used as an argument for climate policy. The reality is that, for instance, in my hometown, the president of the Rotary Club stood up and said, sustainable energy is the future, and that's what we want here. And that had everything to do with what I think is just an aspiration. Like, who wouldn't want local clean energy produced by the sun that's employing people and it looks pretty and it's something you can take pride in. It's local. It's not like belching fumes or something scary that's making people sick. It's just the kind of energy that people want. And I think that you see that reflected too in the incredible innovation that's happening in rural America.
When I was 8 years old, I was living in Sarayaco, where my mother is from, and this peaceful life became threatened by oil companies, and an Argentinian oil company called CGC. And I remember as if it was yesterday, this man called Ricardo Nicolás came to Sarayaco to a big meeting with all the women and children, men, elders, and he was offering us $10,000. It sounded like a lot of money because at that time we did not have money in the community. We had a discussion about this with our people, and it turned out that it was $10 per person because we were about 1,000 people in our community. So yeah, that was a really bad deal.
I became an activist because I saw the death and devastation of what was caused by Chevron in the Ecuadorian Amazon. A rainforest, a pristine rainforest, turned into a toxic waste site. And till this day, it remains that way. This company destroyed the Amazon and said it will fight till hell freezes over. They don't claim that they didn't do it, but they will not take responsibility for it. And it is the same company that is expanding refineries and promoting carbon offsets and to claim that they're protecting rainforests.
We don't want them to continue with cap and trade. We're going to try to get them to stop using cap and trade because that system has not reduced emissions in Wilmington. In fact, it has allowed refineries to evade reducing.
These carbon trading mechanisms are not the answer. They are destroying indigenous communities, forest-dwelling people around the world that are being offered millions of dollars. And it's another form of colonization. They come in there and they have way more than $10,000 now, millions of dollars, millions. And the community gets divided between the people that have been seduced by the capitalist consumer society and the people that understand their original instructions, and that if we take that money, how long is that forest going to be there? Because the fossil fuel industry is doing everything it can to get the last penny out of Mother Earth's belly. And as it's doing that, it's destroying everything that we need to simply exist.
What really needs to be done to protect forests is to stop extraction, to stop deforesting. Not shifting emissions from one place to another or giving credit to one company who invests in forests here but continues to pollute here. Carbon offsets are a false solution to protecting forests and protecting our climate.
It's the only real way to fight climate change, to keep fossil fuels in the ground. There is no other way. There's, the carbon market, climate compensations, whatever politics that the politicians are making are not working. The only way is to keep fossil fuels in the ground. And the only way to do that really is supporting indigenous people.
The radical wing of the climate movement has been saying for decades, we have to keep it in the ground, right? And only now are people starting to have really serious discussions about how that might happen with the technology revolution, with the divestment strategy, with various legal strategies. But the fact of the matter is that the fossil cartel needs to be broken and fossil energy needs to be phased out. And that's a tremendously complicated question. People talk about the managed decline of the sector. How is it actually going to work? Nobody has a really good answer, but we know it has to happen.
Climate justice!
The people who are in favor of cap and trade are against our communities. If you're for that, you are not for Indigenous people, you are not for the clean water, you are not for clean air, you are about capitalism and consumerism, and I'm calling you out.
We see the necessity of keeping it in the ground and making a shift to energy efficiency and 100% clean energy for all. We see the necessity in rebuking false solutions, whether it's carbon pricing or natural gas or clean coal.
Women Speak contains both stories by women and about women leaders. But I want to note that this website, this database, does not include greenwashing, false solutions, or consumption. For example, a couple of weeks ago, I ran into a news article about a woman who had a large role in pushing for carbon trading. This is not something we would have on Women Speak. Just because something, a project, work, an organization is led by a woman and is related to climate change or the environment does not mean it is rooted in justice. So we make sure not to include false solutions or unsustainable techno fixes. We do not want to promote narratives or ideas that are inherently unjust. Women Speak supports solutions that are decentralized, safe, affordable, and accessible to all.
Getting that plan passed, it's cutting our carbon footprint in half by 2035, which is consistent with the latest science that says where we need to be. We're trying to shift 50% of commuters out of their cars alone into biking, walking, or using transit. Think about cutting your own carbon footprint in half in 18, 17 years. I mean, if you really think about that, that's really hard to do. So doing it at the city level is, it's a big lift. So it takes kind of a lot of infrastructure changes, behavior changes, but it's exciting. It's super exciting to be working on this right now. There's so many issues to be tackling. The enthusiasm from residents who don't really care about greenhouse gas emissions, but can get behind things like having more trees on their streets or having options for how to get to work rather than feeling they have to drive alone. Those types of things are exciting.
Deforestation and climate change are intrinsically linked. One of the major sources of global greenhouse gas emissions is from the deforestation of the rainforests. Our forests, when they're healthy, they're a carbon sink. They absorb carbon. They protect biodiversity. They protect livelihoods. But when forests are cut down, they're a carbon emitter. And unfortunately, that's what is happening right now with our forests around the world.
Putting money into restoration work in forests, restoration for wetlands, floodplains. There's a lot of things that we could be investing in that would both help sequester carbon, would help wildlife, persist, and would help adaptation, in a sense of, so if you invest in more floodplains, when we have flooding, the floodplains can take up that water, and that actually helps everybody, right?
To stop deforestation, we need government commitment to really, really stop deforestation and protect our forests and protect Indigenous peoples. It's completely inconsistent for governments and companies to make pledges and commitments to reducing emissions or protecting forests while they're increasing extraction, increasing auctions, increasing oil blocks, increasing mining blocks. building large dams, reducing indigenous peoples' territories in Brazil, for example, for agribusiness. To really stop deforestation, you have to stop policies that continue to enable it. You have to stop financing companies that continue to make money off of deforestation. And I'm talking about not just logging companies, I'm talking about agribusiness companies and traders and financiers and banks and oil companies and mining companies.
We need policies that are robust enough to shut down coal, shut down oil over a period of decades. The thing you got to remember, it's not just about the energy sector. You know, the building sector, the transportation sector, the structure of trade, the structure of agriculture. All of these things have to change.
The transportation sector is responsible for 40% of our greenhouse gases, 50% of the greenhouse gases if you include refining. So to meet our climate change goals in California, we've got to transform the transportation sector. So I'm always looking at every option that can get me as close to zero or to zero as quickly as it can.
We're not solving the problem right now. We're tinkering with the problem. And the way you can tell that is just by looking at the simple numbers like the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. I mean, it's not going down, it's going up. And when you look at carbon emissions for just about anywhere, you take California, our electricity is getting cleaner, in part because of the renewable portfolio standard, and our gasoline emissions associated with transportation are going up.
EVs are going to happen. The nice thing about the fact that EVs are going to happen is that it's going to convince people that things are really changing. But you know, it's not going to happen easily, and it's not going to happen at pace in a profitable fashion without there being social costs that have to be absorbed and redistributed.
So in January of 2018, Governor Brown put in place an executive order challenging California to get to 5 million electric vehicles by 2030, and also the infrastructure to support them. So 250,000 chargers by 2025 and 200 hydrogen refueling stations by 2025. So have the infrastructure in place to help support that transition to the zero emission vehicles. I think energy storage is going to be a critical component of how we get from 50% renewables up to 100% clean energy standard. One of the things I typically think about are the vehicles, all of the electric vehicles that we'll have charging up. And we want to make sure that we have technology in place for the vehicles to be able to talk to the grid and the grid to be able to talk to those vehicles. Because if you think about it, that would be 5 million small storage devices plugged in the grid. And so we want to make sure that those can be used as a resource as we go forward.
The prices are coming down really, really fast. And so what does that mean? Let's subsidize them anyway.
This is absolutely the right time. I think the technology's there and it is cost effective. We do need to drive the costs down some more so that these vehicles become affordable for a broader and broader and broader set of people. We've also got these vehicles in the market right now, which is great because I think a UC Davis study showed, and I don't know the exact percentage, but it's something like 70 or 80% of people actually buy used cars, which means we need to get these vehicles out of the new car market and into the used car market so that that option is there for anyone who wants to buy a used car as well. But the technology's here, it's great. The cars are fast, they're fun, they're zippy. It's a really great technology. And we are almost at 500,000 vehicles in the state of California. And more models are coming, which is very exciting because, as you know, people buy cars for where they want to drive, what they might want to do someday, and not necessarily for completely rational reasons of, oh, I'm just commuting back and forth to work or something like that every day. You want to pick a car that you think is going to be a lot of fun. And we've got 44 models in California right now, and every major auto manufacturer has multiple models that are coming. So there's going to be a lot more choice in this space as well. And I think that's going to excite the public too.
There's a little bit of a technology gap where I don't know if we have the clean, cheap technology readily available at this point.
Unfortunately, it's often about economics. I've talked to people who are concerned about climate change who will still go out and buy an internal combustion engine because it's cheaper than an electric car. So I think you have to figure out a way to either offer a big carrot or link it with a stick in some way in terms of taxing internal combustion engines or gasoline or whatever, so that people just naturally start to move towards electric cars at a faster pace than they would otherwise.
I think like California in particular, and the effort to try to move towards zero emission vehicles, the state is trying to drive the market. And I think the more you have things like that, and if we have a change in the federal government, have them driving the market as well. So eventually when you go to buy a car, you don't have to make that choice of cheaper and dirty versus expensive and cleaner. And instead, there's going to be cheaper and cleaner, more of that available for people.
So we certainly want to figure out how to drive the cost down. That's why we have the incentives in place right now to really try to get towards cost parity. As we get smarter battery technologies, all of these things, I think we'll start to see the cost of those technologies come down.
The market signal, the market prices are the primary way we change behavior. And who can do that? I think government's the one to lead the way.
There's no way you can force anybody to buy an electric car when they go into a lot, but if you can bring the price of that vehicle down to the point where people are comfortable with it, then chances are you're going to see an increase in sales.
Rewarding those who put solar panels on their house, or rewarding those who have a Tesla or electric vehicle, and not rewarding those who don't, is an issue of climate justice. And the reason I say that is because those that are not driving those cars or putting those solar panels, it's not that they don't want to. It's that what is the economic incentive for them to do that? It needs to be a level playing field for all. And it's not currently. I think that there needs to be more government and political will to ensure that the renewable energy revolution that we really need is invested in on a local, national, international scale, and is really, it is a policy. It's a policy, but it's also an economic investment to really benefit all. And it's not, that's not the current situation.
We're demanding politicians stop accepting money from the fossil fuel industry through a campaign called the No Fossil Fuel Money campaign that just this morning reached 1,000 candidates and elected officials who have signed the pledge.
The whole way the climate conversation always goes, it falls into these holes as if it was really about technology. The technology problem is largely solved. That's the good news. That's why we're not doomed. But the political problem is unsolved. The cooperation problem is unsolved. The equity problem is unsolved. And these are the problems that we need to concentrate on going forward.
So we need to think about how can we accelerate what we're doing in California, but also how do we package it in a way that others can pick it up and run with it as well. And so, a great example, the California Air Resources Board can set standards for cars, and depending on which standard you're looking at, 8 to 11 other states have adopted what California is doing. So that's one way that we can help lead the way and bend the curve, the direction that we all need to go in order to solve global climate change.
The danger now is that people are going to go straight from denial to despair. Or they're just going to keep trundling along in this technology dream where they think the machines are going to save them. It's not like that. We need mobilization. We need long-term planning. We need solidarity. We need internationalism. We need a New Deal that lifts up the poor as part of the climate mobilization. We need all the instrumentalities of cooperation and solidarity. And if we put those together with the technology revolution, and if we stop lying to ourselves about how deep the hole we're in is, then I think we still have a chance.
A major issue has been that we've commodified everything, and if there's not a price, then it's not worth anything. And that's in complete counter to what nature really needs and what life really needs to be able to continue on this planet.
Let's just focus on what we need people to do and incentivize them to do that behavior. We need to decarbonize. We need to get away from fossil fuels. We need to stop burning them as soon as possible, and we need to sequester as much carbon as we can. And so how do we attack that on all fronts? By changing the market signals, by levying externality fees.
If we can just keep putting our head down and trying to focus at the task at hand, that maybe we will get to where we need to go. And I guess, I mean, I'm a stubborn optimist. I don't think I can do this kind of work without being a stubborn optimist. So I'm stubbornly optimistic that we will turn the cargo ship. Will we turn it in time so that we're not going to have significant impacts to humanity and wildlife? No. We will have significant impacts. And then it's a question of how we adapt to that as well. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be doing what we're doing and doing it as fast as we can.